Welcome back to DIY December. Turner Motorsport and ECS Tuning are actually going to be joining us for some of the DIYs throughout December, which might even carry into January, honestly. But today we're going to be installing their oil catch can system on our F80 M3. Now they make a universal oil catch can. It's exactly the same one as this, but they do make a specific kit for the F80 M3 as well as the S55 engines that has their brackets and custom molded hoses. And I'm going to show you guys exactly how to install that today. Now this DIY is going to be pretty straightforward. It's very simple. Turner Motorsport also has their own written up version, which I'll have linked down below. But what we're going to do is we're going to remove the two rain tray covers first, as well as the entire strut bar, which is going to make it a lot easier and better for visuals as well. But you might be able to get away without doing that. This just is going to make it a lot easier. So let's just get right to it. To remove the rain tray cover, you're going to have a push pin right here in this corner. Pull out the middle tab and then the whole pin will come out. And then you're going to have three 10mm plastic nuts. Now these nuts, they just need to be turned counterclockwise about 90 degrees. And they will stop turning. Don't keep going. And you don't need a wrench or anything. You can just use your hand with the socket. You're going to lift up from right here and you're going to slide it out from the middle. Now it's the same exact thing on the driver's side. You're going to remove the push pin from right here. And then there's three 10mm plastic nuts, which you have to rotate counterclockwise. Make sure you lift up from the front and then slide it toward you. Now we have 8 bolts holding this carbon strut brace in place. We have two 13mm bolts in the front, and then we have 3 E12 external Torx 12 on each strut tower. You also have a 10mm bolt holding the expansion tank to the strut brace. Next up, we have the engine cover. It's just held in with a couple of grommets, so you just want to lift up from the front and then lift up from the back as well. And one in this corner. Now this right here is your breather hose. We're going to be removing this and we're going to be replacing it with the 2 hoses included in the kit. Now on this one, the tabs are internal and you can just forcefully pull it out and it's going to break those tabs. We're not going to be reusing this, so it doesn't matter. Or you can try to get it with the pick, just make it a little bit easier. And then once that's off, then we're going to actually cut the hose, the plastic hose, off of the fitting that goes into this intake tube. So 4 of these tabs broke off from the inside. They're just going to fall over the valve cover, eventually make their way down. Our engine bay is already pretty dusty, so I'm not even going to be worried about it. But that pretty much means you can't put this hose back on. It's not going to hold it in place. So if you do want to reverse your oil catch can in the future, make sure you buy a new one of these hoses. Now, as you can see, this is a hard plastic line, and it's like a corrugated type of plastic. So what we're going to do on the other end, we're actually going to leave the fitting on this intake tube, and we're just going to cut off the corrugated plastic so we can remove this entire plastic tube. You just want to score it with a blade, and as you score it, it's going to keep cracking and then you can pull the whole hose off. So you're just going to follow this hose down. You might need to move this heat protectant up a little bit. Now you can see at the bottom where it attaches to the intake tube, and we're just going to cut this plastic section off of the fitting. And we're not going to mess with the fitting at all. Now here are the 2 hoses provided with the kit. The long hose goes to the intake tube on the bottom, and the short hose goes to the valve cover. Now on the short hose, you have one end that's wider than the other. So the wide end goes to the valve cover, and make sure you have your hose clamp already on here so we can just slide it in and then secure it with the hose clamp. Lower hose, you have the same thing. The bottom, one of the ends is bigger than the other. The bigger end goes to the intake tube, and you just scoot it on there. Now we might have to trim some of these hoses just to get that perfect fit. And if you do decide to trim it, they're very easy. You just use a razor blade and it'll just cut right along the line. Now with the catch can, you do have to empty it frequently, but once we put this catch can on and we put the strut bar back on, it's gonna be really hard to actually reach down in there and pull the whole can out. So Turner also has this drain system, which is included with their kit if you purchase the whole kit. So we're gonna run this drain hose next to the oil drain bolt. That way whenever we do an oil change, we can drain it out. Now, you might wanna do it more frequently, but what you can do is you can actually check the dipstick. So there's no dipstick on the car, but there's a dipstick on the oil catch can, and you just pull up the dipstick, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna have access to this. We're about to find out here shortly. But you can just check on the dipstick and see how it's looking. Now, if you live in a colder climate, chances are you're gonna have to check this more frequently, you're gonna have to empty it more frequently, and you do not want to let it freeze, because if the vapors and all the condensation that gets picked up in here freezes, is going to cause a lot of stress on the rest of the components in the PCV system and a lot of the seals as well. Now, if you live in a very cold climate, you might want to revert back to the stock PCV system during the winter, but during the summer you can run the catch can. It's all up to you, or to stay on top of it. Now, we're going to get the catch can prepped before we put everything in there. From the factory, they already have the bottom drain bolt plugged. So we're going to actually remove this. We're going to install the fitting they gave us. And for the fitting, you're gonna need some kind of pipe thread sealant. You can use Teflon tape, or you can just use sealant like this. And then we're gonna run this hose all the way down. Now, the way the actual oil catch can sits in the engine bay is with this bracket. So the bracket's gonna go in between the catch can and the top part of the catch can. We're gonna leave it loose for right now so we can actually position it where we want it, but you get the idea. Now, one thing I like to do, but whenever I'm installing a new part like this, especially in the whole intake breather system, is try to clean everything out and make sure everything is tight. Now inside the catch can, we have this baffle. You want to make sure these two bolts on this baffle are tight. You also want to clean out all of the insides of this just from any machining remnants that might be there. This kit actually looks pretty clean. Every couple months, or every season I would even say, you want to take these two screws out, take the catch can out, clean all of the baffles, and reassemble. And that's going to make sure nothing gets clogged up and make sure you have a nice clean working system. Now, these two barbed fittings might not be on your catch can already, but they also have O-rings on the barbed fittings. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually lubricate those. You can use silicone spray or some kind of oil if you really want to. And then we're going to tighten these down as well. These are 25mm fittings. If you don't have a 25mm wrench, you could just use an adjustable one. Now, this catch can is going to become a part of the breather system that's already there from factory. So it's going to have to be under vacuum. You don't want any vacuum leaks, which is why they give those two O-rings on these fittings, as well as an O-ring inside the catch can. So it's going to be a nice and tight operation. And that's also why we're going to put thread sealant on that drain valve. So make sure that everything is nice and tight. It doesn't need to be over tight. The O-rings are going to seal it. Just get it nice and snug. Now, they do provide an Allen key with the kit for that drain plug, so we're just going to go ahead and pull it off. So now this whole thing is put together. We've got the bracket on here, nice and tight. Both of the barbed fittings, nice and tight. We also have this fitting put on the bottom for the drain fitting, dipstick as well, and the can itself is tightened around this bracket. So you can still move it around a little bit, but it's nice and tight. Now we're gonna actually run the drain hose. So I'm just gonna go ahead and install it on here, and we're gonna use this clamp that's provided in the kit to make sure it's secured. Now, they do give another fitting as well. They have a straight fitting and this 90 degree. We use the 90 degree so we can route it towards the oil drain bolt. Once we have the hose routed underneath the car, we're going to cut the hose somewhere, wherever we have good access, and we're going to put this shutoff valve. So for the shutoff valve, we're going to use these two hose clamps, which are also provided, and these are simple. They're just spring clamps. We cut the hose, put the T-valve, the shutoff valve in place, Put the clamps on as well, and then whenever we're doing oil changes, we just open up the valve and we can drain out the entire system. So this bracket is gonna sit underneath these two bolts. So we're gonna remove them. They're both 13 millimeter. So now we can obviously see that this hose is about 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches too tall. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull it off and we're gonna trim the bottom, take off about 1.5 inches. We're gonna cut a little at a time because you can't put back what you already cut. So the hose from the valve cover does not need to be cut. It fits just fine. Let's try it. Another inch. So now we can take off this hose. We can secure the hose clamp on the bottom, on the intake tube, and also the hose clamp for the valve cover, and these two as well. Now the trick to tightening the hose clamp that's on the intake tube is to use a long extension with the 7 millimeter socket. You slide it through right here. You can get on the hose clamp with the socket, and then you could tighten it. And that will make it easier to remove in the future if you ever have to. So I've got the catch can installed. I went ahead and tightened these two bolts as well. All of the hose clamps are nice and tight. I am a little bit worried about this engine cover though. I wonder if it's going to have any problems with this. We'll find out in a little bit, but first we got to take care of that drain. So we're going to lift the car up, get underneath, remove the plastics, and figure out the drain situation. So I've got it routed behind the fender liners and between the engine subframe. So whenever I want to drain it, I just got to pull out the hose and then drain. Now when you're installing this, there's an arrow showing this only one-way valve. So make sure you have the arrow pointing down to drain it out. And then make sure you close it before you secure it back. Now I've got a zip tie that's going to the fender liner as well to hold the hose in place. That way it doesn't hit anything else. You want to make sure the hose is not touching any part of the exhaust because you don't want it to melt. And now whenever I'm done, I can just scoot it back in here. And it's tucked up nice and away from everything. Now there's another piece of plastic that goes right here as well. So everything's going to be nice and secure and there's no chance of it falling out. Now if it does start rattling or if I hear anything, I can put another zip tie if I need to, but I'm not going to right now. I'm just going to leave it like that. Now that we have everything secure, make sure the dipstick is tight, make sure all the hose clamps are secure. We're going to turn the car on before we put everything back together, just to see if we could hear any kind of vacuum leaks anywhere that need to be addressed before we put everything else back together. It's going to be hard to tell if you have a vacuum leak unless it's a major vacuum leak. You will eventually find out by throwing a check engine light or a rough idle or anything like that. Everything sounds fine. We didn't hear any whistling or anything, so we should be good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put everything else back together. We're going to start off with the cover. Now you want to be careful when you're putting this. Watch out for the hoses and everything. And just remember where all the grommets are. We've got 4 grommets. Next up we have the strut bar. So one thing I'm noticing right off the bat, as soon as I'm putting the strut bar in, we definitely won't be able to get that dipstick out. But Turner does make this catch can where you can reverse all of the fittings. So wherever the feed line is, you can switch it around. We can move this can wherever we want, honestly. We would just have to buy new hoses, which I'll have all that stuff linked down below, what other hoses you can use. So it's not that big of a deal, but I'll have those instructions linked down below, so make sure you go read over those if you want to figure out another spot to put this catch can. Or you could just remove the strut bar to check the dipstick. Now this engine bay is really, really tight. You really don't have many options of where you can place this. You can find a way to put it on the driver's side, but the upper radiator hose there is there as well. So it's gonna be difficult. If you had aftermarket intakes, I'm sure you could figure out a way to put it close to that. The reason I do like it in this location though, is because it's near the radiator hoses. The drain line runs around the exhaust, doesn't touch it, but it'll make sure it'll stay warm. So even if it's really cold outside, all of this stuff is getting that engine heat on there to prevent anything from freezing. Now for the strut bar, we're gonna have 6 E12 bolts, 3 on each strut tower, and then we have 2 13mm bolts that go to the front, and we have 1 10mm bolt that goes to the expansion tank. Next up, we have the rain trays. You want to slide it in place first. And you got these 10mm plastic nuts, which are going to turn 90 degrees until the arrows line up. And you should have 1 push pin that goes right here. Same process for the passenger side. Slide it in place first. Turn the nuts 90 degrees until the arrows meet. And 1 push pin right here. Now you also want to make sure you get this rubber seal on top all the way around, and this is just going to keep all the rain, and whenever you're washing your car, it's going to keep all that water from coming behind the hood onto the actual engine itself. And just like that, we have our oil catch can installed. Now this was pretty thorough with that drain line. If you want to do it quick and easy, you can just get rid of that drain line. But as you can see, it is very beneficial since this strut bar is going to be in the way of that dipstick. So make sure you're staying on top of it at least the first few weeks. Once you put the catch can in, it's probably going to catch a lot of blow by, and in the cold it's going to catch a lot of vapors and even just condensation. So just make sure you're checking and cleaning it out, draining it. Stay on top of it, because now you actually have to take care of it yourself and empty it, unlike before where it was just going through the entire system. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks to Turner Motorsport for making this whole catch can system. I love it. It fits right in. You can't even tell that it's there, honestly, and it just looks perfect. This whole kit will be linked down below. I'll also link just the catch can if you want to apply it to a different vehicle, because that is a universal catch can. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in our next video.